Welcome to the acclaimed podcast, The Deep Dive, featuring your esteemed hosts, Andy Monitor and Drew Dinzik, powered by BetSperts.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. More bonus content, Andy. The Buccaneers broke my heart last night, so football season is officially over. It is now NBA season. Here we go. NBA officially tips off on Tuesday, right? Tuesday. And
we would be remiss. We would be remiss, right? You're an NBA guy. You bet it all year.
Yeah, of course. I will bet NBA at least 200 out of the next 365 days, I would guess. So we might as well do a preview. We covered hockey so fairly with Hockey Andy, and we talked a little boxing. So only fair that we give NBA its due shine as we get ready to tip off the 2021-2022 season. And to help us break down the NBA, we welcome NBA hardcore handicapper extraordinaire, guy I've had a handful of very high-level conversations with via his podcast. Only fair again to bring him on the deep dive, give him the opportunity to kind of flex a little bit in front of our audience in terms of his NBA acumen. And that is Josh at @punt_school on Twitter. Josh, welcome to the deep dive.
Thank you, Drew. That's quite the intro there. I'm not sure my
knowledge. I do what I can. That's why they pay me the big bucks.
I appreciate you, though. Appreciate having me on, and let's talk some NBA. It's almost here already, which is crazy.
Yeah, we need to do. It's Friday afternoon for us here, so we need to hammer out some NBA before the weekend starts. Give everybody the whole weekend and Monday really. Monday we have, if you guys want to watch this, you have a whole weekend, a long weekend to get ready for the NBA yet. I am not ready at all. I have a ton of questions. And as we've mentioned numerous times over the years, when me and Drew get into it on like halftime shows, or I feel like, when do we talk NBA? We've done some NBA podcasts, but it feels like it just
playoffs.
Yeah, once we get playoffs, we get into it.
I
feel like it trickles into halftime shows sometimes, where it's just like I have or somebody brings up a game and we get talking about it. And as everybody knows, Drew does a lot more with the NBA. I stick to the amateur side of things on that sport particularly. So I am casual Andy, and I will be just moderating. I've prepared some questions that were in my brain. If anybody is in here live, and again, if you're watching on Twitter, you cannot ask me a question. And by me, I mean Drew and Josh here, who are actually going to be answered. If you are watching this on Twitter right now, hop over to the YouTube stream where you can actually enter a question. If you have some questions, pop them in. We'll probably stick to that towards the second half of the podcast. We'll go do my questions first because I'm more important. We'll start with those and then get to anything you guys have. And if you have anything after the stream is off, throw them in the comments, throw them in the Twitter feed, wherever, and I'm sure Drew and Josh will be more than happy to get into some high-level NBA conversations with you after that. So let's start with the rule change that I didn't realize was a rule change until like a week ago, when everybody showed the same exact clip, not this time, when we do the stupid thing where you jump up and you kick your legs out, you pretend like you're taking a reasonable shot from well beyond the arc. The Harden. I mean, I didn't want to call out James Harden, but it is for him. But I mean, it has been, even for somebody who doesn't watch a ton of NBA, like it was a bit annoying. Unless you've bet on them or you're a fan of the team that has Harden, it's an annoying kind of thing. I'm glad they changed that. That said, like, I think most people would agree with my take that I'm happy the rule has changed. It makes for a better brand of basketball. But from a handicapping standpoint, does it really change anything? Whether, maybe outside of maybe player props. I mean, obviously, I would think maybe a little bit with player props, but from a grand scheme of team, player level, anything, are you taking this into account at all when you're handicapping this year? Start with Josh. Sorry.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's going to impact it all that much, if I'm perfectly honest. I think there's going to be a teething process, maybe, the first couple weeks where players still try it and gauge exactly what they can get away with and what they can't. My issue with like a rule change like this is it's just so subjective, right? It comes down to interpretation on the night and who's officiating on the night. And when you get into that sort of granular aspect of things, it can become frustrating for viewers and for fans as well if it's not consistent on a nightly basis. So it's going to be interesting to watch the first couple of weeks and the implementation of it. In terms of it impacting scoring in particular, obviously, I personally don't think that's going to be the case. I think, these guys are still going to find ways to score the basketball. Harden in particular. I mean, you look at the fact that the rule change is targeting superstar players, right? Like that's kind of the crux of it here. Those guys are good enough that they'll figure it out and they'll still score the basketball, or they'll find other ways for the team to score the basketball. My only, of that list of players, I think the only question mark I have is Trae Young, right? Like he didn't shoot the ball well last year at all. Does he become more of a facilitator now? And like you said, that's something that probably impacts props, I think, in particular in these first few weeks, even the first couple months of the season. But for me, I don't think it's necessarily going to impact how I look at totals or how I judge totals, at least for now anyway. If I find that in the first few weeks it's making drastic changes and that they're calling basically anything and everything. And I think the one thing as well to look out for is not just the non-calls, but which ones are they going to turn into offensive fouls as well?
I was just going to say, are they going to start calling it the other way? And Drew, you can see Drew cringing when you said, like, when you use the word consistency with the referees, like every sport, we seem to struggle with that. I think that's the biggest thing in Drew. Have you seen that at all? Have you guys, either of you, if you watched much preseason and seen, are they turning this around in the offense and calling offensive fouls with these or not?
It's been a refreshing hands off from the refs in the preseason so far in general, but that's usually the way the preseason goes. And it's like it's a weird, delicate balance of changing rules in any sport, as you well know, because on one hand, like, do we want to improve the quality of the product? Of course. But on the other hand, do you really want to put more of the decision making into the hands of the referees? Absolutely not. And consistency is a huge problem, as it is across all, at least the North American sports that I bet on, outside of tennis. I suppose tennis is relatively fairly officiated, but yeah, the last thing I think you really want is putting more power in the hands of the referees, and that's what this kind of does. I think from a macro scoring standpoint in the NBA, there are other things that I think are going to be like 10 to 100x important relative to this particular wrinkle. And honestly, I don't even know if I'll bet totals this year. I completely stayed away last year because I kind of went into it like, I don't really know how this is going to go. And I made some numbers and I tested my numbers in the first couple weeks. And I was like, oh my God, I'd be losing my ass if I was playing these totals. So I'm just going to stay away. I don't even actually think until the playoffs, I did much total betting at all last year. In the playoffs, then you caught some overreaction, underreaction spots that were pretty solid. But in the regular season, totals were extremely hard last year to win. And there was even the market makers. I can tell you, just kind of following the lines and where there was momentum, like over the course of the season last year, I think the market makers got beat on totals in general. And, a ton of it was kind of came down to like the game changed a little bit just in terms of offensive efficiency. Talked about this with Josh specifically at length in the early middle of the season. Actually, it helped me make some good bets throughout the middle of the year. Offensive efficiency and 3-point shooting was at just an absolutely impossibly high percentage. And some of that was coaching, some of that was players, but a lot of it was there was no fans distracting the shooters. And it just made it that much easier to generate offense. You had teams like the Clippers putting up offensive efficiency that I would have thought was impossible a few years prior. And now, reintroducing fans, having a full season of travel after a short off season. My gut is saying that the scoring is going to be surprisingly low and that you may have some under first month of the season, but I don't know that I'm going to ultimately take action on that. I'm probably just going to watch unders go 60 and 30 and then curse myself for it. But that's kind of the read I got.
Yeah. And Josh will probably know this right off the top of his head. It feels like the gap between the end of the finals and Tuesday, how much shorter is that than a normal year? Obviously we had the bubble year that led into the goofy year. And now we go from a goofy year back to a pretty normal start for the season. Like, how much shorter was the off season this year?
Well, it's not even just the shortened
was
off
it?
season. It's not even just the shortened off season as well, right? Like you said, it's the follow on from the bubble. So like they had a shortened off season after the bubble.
Oh, yeah, the cumulative effects of it, yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So you're talking like over the course of 2 full seasons. I think they've had it's 3.5 months total between those 2 seasons.
Yeah,
that's
they lost.
That's going to be huge. Yeah,
This
that's
particular,
it's good for like teams like the Timberwolves who just haven't had to play all those extra games in the
we'll
in
get
the
to the
postseason.
Timberwolves.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we'll get to the Timberwolves. In cumulatively, they lost about a month and a week. The finals would usually wrap around July or June 15th, June 15th.
That's right.
And they wrapped this year around July 20th. This year, to complicate matters even more, they played the Olympics in between in a year where we weren't even expecting Olympics. And so some players basically got no off season. Anyone that was like, especially who logged reasonable minutes in the Olympics got virtually no, and played in the playoffs, got no off season. Other players, other teams, you saw a lot of tanking last year at the end of the year. And so sort of the dregs of the NBA for last season, those guys are probably pretty rested. And just kind of thinking back to like some teams that were prepared to make a leap that didn't go to the bubble, that really took advantage of their rest differential. The Hawks immediately come to mind. The Hawks got off to a pretty decent start last year, and I felt like a lot of it was because they didn't have that, the bubble fatigue still kind of shadowing over their season. Ultimately, then they slid, fired their coach, hired a new coach, and way exceeded the expectations.
The rest is
history. But, there probably are a couple of teams that were lottery teams last year that their big time players didn't log minutes late into the season, that got a real deal off season to regroup, to work on their game, to, hone their bodies, blah, 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 and that they're going to come out and be pretty good in this first month of the season. And so I think as far as priors go, like, I think you can pretty well circle your kind of known teams towards the top who are good and not really adjust your priors too aggressively one way or the other on those teams. And then the ones that are at the bottom, if you're seeing stuff like they're surprisingly performing above expectation, I think you're going to have to be pretty aggressive adjusting your priors on those.
Sure. Yeah, a bit of I lied right off the bat. Anyone who caught the beginning and said I was going to go through all my questions. This is just a better question. So I'm going to steal this from the live chat from Mr. Birdie here, and I'll have to take his word or to her. Birdie might be a girl's name. I don't know. We are seeing a rush of home team success to start the NHL season. Obviously, we're only a couple days in, and I'll again take their word for it. I don't know. That might be true. Do you see that happening early in the NBA? Home dog money line might be good early. Kind of spinning off of that too is what were you guys doing with what was the season? 13-4, they're saying home teams on the ice so far. What was the season before the bubble season? It's like 2018? How far back do I have to go to say not bubble season?
19 into 20 was the pre-bubble. Yeah.
Okay. So are you going to be back for home court advantage? Are you going to be back to those kind of numbers? Or what has been the progression from that season into, obviously the bubble season was, Lord no, I don't even care what you did with home court because it didn't exist and you probably didn't do anything, into last year, into back into this year. What has been the flow and like, what's the plan for that? Or are you just going to kind of have to do some quick ass adjusting this year, Josh?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's one that I've sort of been bouncing ideas off a couple of people. Drew, I know I touched base with you on this one actually a couple of days ago, just to sort of gauge, I guess, a collective idea on where people sit. I think I'm being a little bit more aggressive with home court advantage, and I kind of tried to compare it as well to like a couple of other sports I bet. And as you guys know, when it comes to the NFL in particular, like what's home field advantage really worth this year? I feel like that number just keeps dropping by the week. And the flip side is like I bet European soccer quite aggressively. The early stages of that season in the Premier League in particular, home teams were absolutely annihilating things. And that came off of a season where there was no fans at all. and it was, a record low win percentage for home teams as a result. They only won 38% of games last season, which is incredible. And the first month of this season, it was sitting at about 57% of home teams were winning games outright. So kind of, I guess, trying to project what happens in the NBA based off of that, it makes it more difficult because you're getting two kind of polar opposite extremes, if you will. But I'm still kind of the belief that I think that the NBA home court is going to matter in the early goings of this season. So I've weighted my home court advantage pretty aggressively as a result. And it's sort of showing in the opening week of early markets that I've seen, where I've sort of picked up notable edges on most of the home teams, be them favorites or underdogs as well, for that matter. I wouldn't be against the idea of kind of taking some live home dogs in the first few weeks of the season. I think it has the potential for rewards to be reaped, if you will, assuming you don't go crazy with it and just blind bet all of them. But yeah, I can definitely see the first few weeks of the season either working in my favor in terms of the adjustments I've made for home court being relevant, or I'm going to be making the quick adjustment the other way and realizing that maybe it's not as impactful as it was pre-bubble.
Yeah,
sure. I like how you're obviously, I mean, it goes without saying you're factoring it in a little heavier than the actual market if you're just automatically showing a little bit of edge leaning towards home teams. And I like that you're willing to trust your process and just say, like, I'm willing to be a little off market with this, but also I'm willing to rein that in. If it's not going well, I'm willing to admit it, because there's no trophy for being stubborn and fighting against this. Like, if you're wrong, admit it quick, make your adjustments, and start winning some actual money. That is the key to this. Drew, what about you with home court?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's cool that we have Larry Bird in the chat. I'm assuming that's Birdie. Larry Bird seems like the kind of guy who would use a pseudonym like Birdie to get his questions in. It's also cool Larry Bird bets hockey and knows what the home money line.
Big Bruins guy.
Yeah, big Bruins guy. Is he a Bruins guy? Yeah, I guess probably. Ultimately though, the home court
Indiana
advantage
doesn't have a team.
Home court advantage in the NBA is funny, man, because it's almost more like park factor in baseball than it is like a home court advantage kind of conceptually in, like, say, college basketball, right? In college basketball, if you want to give everybody a 4 to 5% win bump because they're home, that's fine. In the NBA, I think you have to be a lot more specific to the city, the arena, the type of team. Because there are kind of unique, funky factors with a lot of these places. Typically, you have massive home court advantage in Utah and Denver. Why would that be? Because they're at altitude. Like, that's not really a very complicated thesis. But if you're just using a blanket home court number for all of your games, you're probably going to bet on road teams in those cities, and you're going to lose over the balance of the season. Similarly, the NBA tends to sequence games where they go through the Rockies and they make teams travel to one and then the other. And the second of those in sequence can be impactful, or the team could have, adjusted, gone early, adjusted to the first one, and then by the time they're playing the second game, the effects aren't quite as large. So kind of paying attention to what teams are doing travel wise makes a difference. You almost need to kind of have it as sort of one of the knobs in the as you go game by game handicapping. Is a team staying overnight in LA, last game of the road trip before they go home, and last chance to see the side chicks before back to the home chicks? Like, there's for sure an element of that in the NBA that is not non-trivial. In general, if there are star-loaded teams with guys who are kind of that proclivity, then you probably need to be paying attention to when they go through LA, when they go through New York, when they go through Miami,
Lord help
when
us
they go through Toronto.
Lord help us when they get a Vegas team.
Yes, right. Sure enough.
Summer League's already a mess.
Yeah, so paying attention to those kind of little funky park factor-esque, arena factor-esque home court, I think, is important. But from a general macro sense, I get the same feeling that it will the shooting thing, for instance, right? Like if what we saw last year with no fans led to shooting being outrageous, I personally think, just looking at it, and I say think this, I looked at the data, like it was, a lot of it was road team shooting was better. It wasn't like so much so that it was like clearly obvious that was what was driving it. But hand in hand, higher scoring, road teams did well. Like that, that the reason behind it potentially being that you had less distraction when you were lining up your shot, I think is real. And so you could see home teams do a little bit better in general, being more familiar with the setting with their 3-point shots, even with the fans. And then the road team struggling a little more in that regard. And that might be the difference you need right there to win a bet in the NBA.
Yeah. Just quickly, actually, to interject just on what you said there in terms of the fan impact as well, that's interesting and worth sort of noting for people for shooting. I think we saw an example of it as well in the playoffs, that it was a real thing. You'd look at like the Milwaukee Bucks regular season 3-point shooting, and it was, lights out, as most sort of teams were on a nightly basis, it seems. But those final couple of rounds of the playoffs, and, I guess this also comes down to how you interpret the data. Was it nerves and the occasion for them, or was it the fact that they were then playing in packed arenas again? But it absolutely nosedived, the 3-point shooting percentages and their splits across the board. So does that carry over now, like you said, into the full regular season with fans back in arenas again? It'll be very interesting to follow.
No, for sure. I get what you're saying there too. And yeah, there's so many factors, like it just, like you said, the nerves, the moment, or it's like, hey, you're just playing really good teams all the time now. Like, are these, it depends. It depends. Different people feel differently about 3-point defense. I know that's become a bit of a topic here too. I don't know if that's something I'm going to get into. That might be over my head. Since, my next question is just, are the Lakers prices right? What is this team like? I just quickly looked at the pricing, and I get, you have a super team in Brooklyn, and at least 2/3 of a super team in Brooklyn, and you do have it in LA, but like the West seems to have some decent, competent teams, and you have even what was it, like even money to win the Pacific, like plus 150 to win the conference, and this, I'm just pulling this from a market making book. The Lakers plus 369 to win the title. Who else is on this team besides the big three names? And like, just one, you look at like the tail risk of a superstar who's aging, another superstar who's had lots and lots of injuries, and then a third superstar who you've never seen play with these two first superstars, and can be a bit of a, I don't know what the word for him is. Like, it just seems like, does this all jive to becoming like, there's a long tail to this being like a 5 seed, right?
Go check out some Russell Westbrook aging curves, and then come back and tell me with a straight face that he's a superstar. I'll wait.
No, that's where I'm at too. Like, the stats are fun. Like, he's a stat monster, and he's good. Like, he's a freak athlete. The guy could probably play multiple, like, he could play minor league baseball. Like, just put him out there. Like, he's a freak. I get it, but like, does this all jive? Because that's what I'm saying. As far as there's a long tail to this team being like, all of a sudden, we have a road series in the first round of the playoffs. Like, what happened? Well, a few things happened, and I guess fragility, like you mentioned it around AD, but fragility in the Nassib sense, as far as this team has multiple choke points to be like, oh no, like this isn't a very good team right now after an injury, or just the fact that, like, what's the bench look like? What's the playoff rotations look like? Talk. It sounds like we're on the same page here, but your reasons and how do you attack this if you are looking at anything in the futures market or throughout the season? How would you attack the Lakers or attack the West, Josh?
Yeah, look, I couldn't be more in agreement with you. I don't think, like, I'm selling the Lakers at this point. I think the market price is really, really wrong on them. Of course, like, you have LeBron, and you're going to be in the upper echelon of the conversation immediately, regardless of who the hell is on the roster with him. But, I think we're finally seeing as well that LeBron's body isn't quite what it was. And that's got to be a factor too. Like, he's not going to play 82 games this regular season. That's a fact. If he plays 60 to 65, and AD plays his usual 60 to 65 games in this regular season, like, yeah, I think the ceiling for the team might be a 4 seed. Let alone where the floor of the team might end up, because the drop off after those two is quite drastic. And I don't have Russ anywhere near those two. So it's like AD, LeBron, and then a drop to Russ, and then another drop to like the remainder tail end of this roster, which has kind of just been like
Kuzma ain't walking through that door.
it just feels like a mesh of a team, right? Like they've kind of just gone and got all these veterans and just hope that it's going to fit together. But you bring in like Melo, and if you have like Melo and Russ sharing the floor, like you have these two negative EV defenders together, and you kind of just hoping that AD can hold it down in the paint for them and keep it going. And then you still got Anthony Davis refusing to play the 5, like again publicly making it known that he refuses to do so during the regular season. So now you're
probably good for his health though too. Like he knows, he's like, I just get hurt day one.
Maybe that is a factor, but I mean, that now means Russ has to play with AD and a 5, like a DeAndre Jordan, and just clog the paint. And then you've got LeBron trying to as well, I guess, do the same. The most efficient LeBron lineups we know is LeBron and 4 shooters, basically.
Yeah.
And you got like none really. What are we hoping for, I guess, in some of those other acquisitions like Kendrick Nunn, Malik Monk? Like, do you really think that these guys can just come in, shoot the ball, and be efficient for them? I mean, I think there's a reason that like these guys were sort of left behind, if you will, in free agency and whatnot. Like, there's a reason Kendrick Nunn wasn't playing in Miami. Even when he was having good regular seasons, come playoffs, he was just an absolute non-factor in the rotations. And I think Spoelstra did that for a very, very legitimate reason. And it'll be interesting to see how that transpires, I think, in LA. But yeah, I couldn't agree more in that the pricing for the team is just, it's wrong. And it's not even just that the Western Conference is competitive. The Pacific Division is really competitive. Like the Phoenix Suns are a really good team. The Warriors are going to be a very competitive team. They might be the 3rd best team in their own division, let alone the conference.
I think ultimately they probably finish top 2. But the Lakers,
in the West?
In the Pacific. I think that's.
I was going to say a strong disagreement from Drew's full on the Lakers bandwagon.
Well, this is. I mean, the Lakers, honestly, like we're kind of. I've gone through plenty of cycles of NBA opinion at this point through betting year after year after year after year, and I'm back down to the like counting LeBron out, which is usually when he goes on and averages a triple double and gets the easy 1 seed, wins 62 games with this team. So keep in mind, that he has a tendency to prove the haters wrong, and for sure, the market futures, I agree, are priced like they're basically priced like, we don't want your Lakers money. Go bet that somewhere else. Like the prices are just really, really not favorable, especially for a team that's expected to win 52 games. And I think in a competitive conference. And I think you look at some of the kind of the models that are out there, the 538s and the public stuff that, some of the, the data scientists just kind of chug and chuck out there. They have the Lakers kind of in the middle of the pack in the West, and reality is probably somewhere in between. Anthony Davis may play more games than we expect this year, in which case he's probably a defensive player of the year candidate. The guys that we got in Nunn and Monk might have lots of space and operate fine as shooters around the core of this team. I like Talon. I like THT in general. Horton Tucker as a kind of a nice role player and a second unit guy, at least, can create a little bit of his own offense. I like Trevor Ariza in general for the role he will provide. Neither of those guys are available to start the season. So it's going to be you're going to get a lot of Kent Bazemore minutes. You might get a lot of Carmelo Anthony and Dwight Howard minutes. Yeah,
still in the league, huh?
This team, man. Rajon Rondo is on the depth chart. DeAndre Jordan is on the depth chart. Dwight Howard is on the depth chart. Carmelo Anthony is on the depth chart. Russell Westbrook is on the depth chart. This is a team.
How much do they win? Like how much do they win the 2000 14 NBA championship by.
They sweep it. Yeah, sweep.
Murder.
Easy
Like,
sweep.
yeah, that's a do not lose a game in the playoffs.
Yes,
yeah, that's
absolutely.
a 16 note. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Murderous team.
So basically, I guess where I'm at with this, guys, is their price is so generous in terms of their actual probability of winning the title that should create value elsewhere in the West, because they probably kind of land in that 4 or 5 range. And I doubt that they put themselves through the play-in type of scenario that they had last year. And I think if you want to bet the Lakers, just wait for the playoffs, because I was actually kind of surprised. Like, there was not a lot of market support for them last year. Like, you could get, like, other than maybe after the one impressive bounce back game they had against the Suns, then like the prices all started to kind of flip.
Yeah.
But that didn't last very long at all. Like, the market was pretty cool on them heading into last year's playoffs. You could get some favorable prices. No one was afraid to write a bet on the Lakers. And honestly, like, I don't see that changing much between now and the playoffs this year. So I think you can be as patient as you like. You can see how healthy this team is come April before you get involved with the Lakers at all. And I think ultimately what that means is whoever your team of choices in the West, you probably need to grab some now, because those numbers are going to get a lot shorter.
Yeah, pick your poison out there. I'm just where does Lou Dort play?
Actually, one other quick thing I want to say about the West.
Just booking.
There's also not really an emergency to go grab the team that you like in the West now. You can actually wait about a month. Oh, you too late? You already did?
Just Oklahoma City.
Oh wow. Jeez. You got a big Alexi I can't remember even how to pronounce this. We got a Poku fan here. Yeah. Andy Molitor, Poku fan. The Lakers start the season super duper soft. They play the Thunder twice. They play the Rockets twice in like the first 10 games. They play a bunch of other games that, with teams that they're, Suns, Warriors, that they played a bunch of preseason games against early. So, they should have a decent start to the season. Where I think you're going to be able to do some selling high on them is going to come like November, and then again in December as their schedule starts to get a lot tougher. And at that point, that's probably the buy low spot on anyone else in the West who you think has shown promise.
All right, I dig it. I'm glad I wasn't like just. Sometimes I ask questions to you in the NBA, Drew, and you have to tell me why I'm dumb. Like, you do it in a nice way every time. Like, here's all the things you're missing, Andy. So I'm glad you're both kind of in agreement with me there. It's like, I don't know if this works. Back to other stuff I don't understand about the NBA. And I'm just going to put these two questions together, and we'll just have a big conversation on like how we're treating these teams. Maybe there's more than 2 teams involved. I think the Timberwolves are probably a third team at least that you need to talk about in this. But like, I wrote down, what's the deal with Ben Simmons and what happens there? And like, are you worried? What kind of adjustments do you need to make there? Have you already? And like, is Kyrie just not going to play? And does that matter? Like, is that team still on par with Milwaukee even without him? I mean, you can see what their prices are. They're a heavy favorite, I believe, to win the East. They're actually minus money right now, minus 108. Your second favorite, obviously, being the Bucks, closer to 4-1. Which that's probably still a little much for the Nets. But basically, what's the deal with that? What's going to happen, and how are you approaching that, like, from a macro standpoint with the league right now?
I'll start with
Josh first, correct?
Look, I'll start with the Kyrie one quick, because Brooklyn without Kyrie is probably, for me anyway, where the market has them right now. I think they are genuinely that much better than any team in the NBA with KD and Harden. And if you just chuck in Kyrie, I think they probably shrink a little bit in pricing. Not much. I think the pricing's kind of one of those situations where they've just sort of stuck it in the middle, right? Like, they'll make a small adjustment if Kyrie comes back and starts playing. And if he doesn't come back, then, maybe you're getting a slightly worse price and you might get a little bit more inflation on them in a couple of months' time. But nothing drastic. I think that that they're comfortably for me still the 1 seed in the East and the team to beat in the NBA, presuming the other 2 superstars stay healthy. Like I still get flashbacks to that series against the Bucks where I'm just like, if Harden was healthy, Milwaukee probably doesn't win that series. And
Durant's giant foot wasn't on the line with that crazy shot late. Like that was such a good game too.
Yeah.
So losing Kyrie, not the end of the world, or
not the end of the world. Yeah,
the Philly one edge of the world for him.
The Philly one is interesting. The Simmons situation is super interesting. I've kind of downgraded Philadelphia a little bit for it. I don't even know if he's going to be available to start the season. Like, it's still really weird and under wraps. And if he comes back, I'm not sure I necessarily upgrade them either, because we don't know what his role is going to be. And I would find it really hard to believe that they just inject him straight back in the starting lineup and go about, the same rotations and the same sort of level of play that they had during the regular season last year with him. So that one's a sort of watch and wait, I think, for me, in terms of let's just see how it all pans out. Let's see what Philly is without him if he's not there. And then even if he's there, let's see what they are with this version of Ben Simmons before we start to sort of assess exactly what this team is.
And maybe, Drew, you can help me with like the timeline, just because maybe I didn't follow along close enough. But like the Simmons stuff, it's like you drunkenly broke up with your girlfriend, and then the next day you just show up for dinner with her parents and pretend.
Like, what happened? What happened?
Like he just came back. He's eligible to play, and like he's in the building. What is that? What exactly is happening in the front office with him, right? Or does nobody just know? Is everyone where I'm at?
Well, the front office,
I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, the front office is basically like, we're not going to move you for 30 cents on the dollar. Come back. Mm-hmm. Like, let's reintegrate with the team. Play your way into some sort of value, and we'll make an honest effort to trade you. That's my guess as to how that communication has gone down. And he's probably been like, okay, fine. I'm back. It's going to be awkward, but I'm going to try to make this work. And then I want you to move me. Ultimately, I don't know that there's a huge demand for him. He's obviously playing. He's got some confidence issues, to put it politely. By the way, you want a little preseason betting nugget? Detroit Pistons tonight playing the 76ers, and there will be no Embiid. No Ben Simmons, no Danny Green, no Tobias Harris, no Matisse Thybulle, no Shake Milton. Yes, it'll be the Andre Drummond show against the Pistons. So Pistons are -2 in that game, and I think that's still a relatively valuable play. But we will put that little betting nugget aside.
We'll get to bet the Pistons as a favorite. Like, just to do that feels right.
But ultimately, I do think Embiid is still an enormous question mark that he plays the full season. Even more so in my mind than a guy like Anthony Davis. I can see Anthony Davis missing time with like getting like paper cuts type of stuff. Embiid, I worry about like the Widowmaker injury, like any given timeout, like he could have the Widowmaker kind of deal. And so I'm not ever really going to get involved with the Sixers in the futures market. And I think really his tail risk of him going down, that unwinds this entire team. Forget about the Ben Simmons stuff. Like, if you don't have a healthy Joel Embiid come to the playoffs, you have no shot of making a run. So fascinated to see how they handle the Simmons situation, but the Embiid health and keeping an eye on how he is performing is much more impactful to their ultimate, how they play out the season. Brooklyn and Kyrie, to me, is similar. Like, if Kyrie's out there, they are so clearly the best in the East that it's not even worth betting into the East futures market. But there's no guarantee he'll be on the team, and there's no guarantee that he'll play in the playoffs, and there's no guarantee he'll play at all. Right now, obviously, there's a huge communication issue going on between teammates. It sounds like at least Harden and Durant aren't especially loving how this is going down, and those guys wield a ton of power with the Nets overall in terms of what they do with that roster. And so they may say, okay, get what we can get for them, let's move on. And at that point, they're still absolutely loaded. Like all of like the depth pieces around like it, where you can look at the Lakers choices to backfill around the stars and ask questions. The choices the Nets made to backfill around stars, it's like, oh wow, oh that's interesting. Oh that's interesting. That might work. That's a good fit. That's a guy that you can count on, right? Like the backfill does look pretty well done. So the Nets are still going to win a ton of games, regardless of however much the big three play. They ought to load manage the shit out of Durant and Harden, so that those guys are healthy, because you need both of them, obviously, as we learned this last year. And should still be the favorites in the East, assuming that all that goes swimmingly. Durant and Harden, by the way, they're getting up there age-wise. Like it's the same story with LeBron, but LeBron seems to defy age. We'll learn if these guys can also defy age, but they're getting up there. And obviously, Harden's lived a little bit harder life, so we'll see how he ages into the into the later years of his career. But yeah, the question I want to answer here from Ski, and good to see Ski, great NBA handicapper, Ski Prophet. Is there value on another team to win the Atlantic Division with all the drama going on? I think so, and I have bet into that market. And I took a super duper long shot price on the Toronto Raptors. They're 33-1 to win the Atlantic right now. I know I'm not giving a ton of respect to the Celtics, Josh's team, or the Knicks, but I think the Raptors are going to be in this mix. I like the squad. I like Nick Nurse as a coach. I like that they'll have home court finally this year. I like that they tanked towards the end of last year. Again, kind of going back to my kind of off the top comment about teams that tanked, like, these guys all got a good amount of rest to the end of last season. Like they didn't work that hard in the months of April and May. And they got a full real offseason here to prep. They should be firing coming out of the gate. I'm excited about the Raptors. I think their team total over is probably the best on the board right now. And I think 33-1 for them to win the Atlantic is kind of an insane price.
Yeah, not a bad price. I could make a case for Boston. I'm not going to go crazy.
I was going to say rebuttal for Boston, Josh.
I'm just going to let you know that I think that there's a world where Boston are the most competitive team in that division outside of obviously the Nets, or alongside rather the Nets. Last year, I think people forget just how bad Boston had it with injuries and COVID in particular. Like they were ravaged for months at a time. Like there was just no consistency in the lineups whatsoever. The roster itself was just a bit of a mismatch as well. I mean, as soon as you sort of removed the starting five, you looked at what was up next, and it was just this head scratching, like who the hell are they and what can they actually do on a basketball court? And you look at what they've done in retooling that roster, and now it's like the first two players off the bench are probably going to be Al Horford and Dennis Schroeder, and that's an immediate upgrade. Next man up after that, probably Josh Richardson, assuming, depending on what they do with the starting lineups. But that is already a much better rotation. And as long as you're kind of getting Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum to play, 70, 75 games this regular season, I think it could come to the end of the season where you look back at the Boston Celtics win total and it's kind of like, why did I not bet the over here? I mean, based on sort of the 2, even the 3 years, if you want to go that far prior to last season, like this total would have seemed extremely short for the Celtics. And I just think that the overreaction off of what happened last season has given them this really short sort of regular season win total, and then this really inflated price to win the division, where all it could take is just basically health and consistency, and you're going to see like an immediate upgrade in terms of the team performance. And that defense for me, I'm pretty confident is going to be a top 5 defense by the end of this season.
Interesting. Yeah. Time Lord.
Yeah.
Defensive player of the year.
Look, it's the first time that like the Celtics don't have to hide a point guard defensively in forever. Like from Isaiah Thomas to Kyrie Irving to Kemba Walker, they've always had that liability on the floor, and now it's Marcus Smart starts.
Are we expecting Marcus Smart to make it through the season on the Celtics roster? Because there's a little tension between him and the rest of those guys in the locker room. He's a tough guy to get along with.
Yeah, I hear that. I think he does. I think they do, to be honest. I think it might be
I would
a
have
little bit.
prepped more Celtic stuff. I knew we had Australian Bill Simmons on. Like this is, Drew only let me know that you're a Celtics guy a bit ago. But and it's funny. There's a bunch of these teams in the middle. I zeroed in on a team. Apparently, none of you guys like. I looked at the Bulls. They're kind of in that same price range. I got excited by their lineup. Like,
well, real quick, before moving off the Celtics, let me ask.
Yeah.
I'll ask Josh a question then about the Celtics before we move to the Bulls. What is your expectation coaching wise? Is this an upgrade over Brad Stevens? Because Brad Stevens pretty clearly always had the right play for the right time, but wasn't getting the most out of that team. Let's be honest. Like over the balance of, I mean, is this potentially an upgrade?
I think it might be. Like the one question I think I remember just stewing over, and I could go into like this deep dark hole for hours, is like, is Brad Stevens a good coach? Like I still don't know.
Get out of a timeout.
Are we sure he's good?
Yeah, I genuinely don't know. So it could be a coaching upgrade. I mean, he comes with this really like high reputation for being a great defensive coach, which is why I genuinely think we'll be a top 5 defense, because the pieces are already there. So if he can sort of implement them in the right way, I think that, that sets a really good foundation. And for me, when I look at like, just as like a quick sort of sidetrack, but when I look at like regular season win totals, and especially for these mid-tier teams, it's kind of like I start with the defense and I'm like, which of these teams can give me sort of, a top tier defensive production over the course of a full season? I think that's the baseline, right? And like for the Celtics, if I have them ranked sort of around that 4-5 mark for defensive efficiency over a full season, and then you look at that win season total and it's like, well, you're not really asking for them to have to do too much offensively if the defense does carry the large portion of the weight here for them to clear the number. So look, to answer your question though, I think it might be a coaching upgrade, but I think at worst you're going to get the same coach. I don't think it's a drop off, and that's kind of all that I'm concerned with.
I had forgotten about I'm just laughing like to myself about who was it that sent out the tweet about how excited they were for the first. It was the first black coach in Celtics history, and then it turned out it was like the third or fourth. Like, buddy, you weren't even close.
Who did say that?
It was maybe Williams.
Was it?
I think it was.
Might have been.
I think you might be right.
I think it was Williams. Like that tweet was instantly just ravaged. Buddy, like you're missing some pretty big names along the history of the storied Celtics franchise. Jay Williams, that was it.
They are known for having the first ever African American head coach in all professional sports in the United States, and that's that was a whiff.
Literally only had to go back like to the previous coach as well, so it's not even like he had to cast his memory.
That's right. That's exactly.
Doc Rivers was like right
when he was in the league.
Well, even as like Andy who doesn't watch basketball, I'm like, I'm pretty sure Doc Rivers coached there. And then I went and looked it's like, oh my god, they had the first black coach. And it's like this is wild. So and I don't know a bunch about him. Sounds like Josh has some faith in him. And it's coaching. Obviously coaching is 2 parts. It is the X's and O's and calling the play out of the timeout and having the right lineups and all that, but also the motivator of men and what have you, and keeping the team together. And sometimes when you have people like Marcus Smart, that does become difficult. So it'll be interesting to watch them. I guess, like I said before we got back into Celtics there, I zoned in on the Bulls just based on the roster. Am I wrong? Like, is this not a good roster, or we just don't know yet? Like DeMar and Zach, I guess Laurie's not what we thought he would be. Like, everybody got excited about Laurie for a little bit, but then is this the good ball? And then Vucevic, like that's good, right? And Kobe White, like this is a good team to maybe gel and do something. Or am I just dead wrong? Like this is the team I got excited about when I looked at it today. I'm a Bulls fan today. Am I dead?
Well,
Laurie's not even on the Bulls anymore, I guess.
No, I was just going to say, like, Markkanen's over in Cleveland, so I mean, he could be bad somewhere else, and it won't impact the Chicago. So that's a win.
That's good. I was going to say that was the weakest spot out of that, and he's not even there. Good.
Well, like I actually think the guy that's there now, Patrick Williams playing the 4, is probably going to be, as strange as it sounds, one of the most important pieces for them this season, because he's the most elite defender on that team, and this is a team that defensively has a lot of question marks around it, and that kind of what scares me a little bit with them. They can look all flashy and up tempo and great and scoring the basketball, but if they can't get stops, I mean, it's kind of all for nothing, really. Even the offensive side of things, I'm a little bit skeptical to jump in and say that this is going to be a great team because the names are great, but like you look at every player individually and how they play. They're all sort of high usage guys, right? Like Vucevic was a high usage guy in Orlando. DeMar was a high usage guy in San Antonio. Zach LaVine's always been a high usage guy and is the guy in Chicago. So firstly, it's kind of like, how are they going to all share the ball and what are their individual roles within the team? And then two is, let's not forget, I mean, whether you like it or not, this is like the day and age of the 3-point shot. Zach LaVine, I guess you can kind of make an argument that he is a 3-point shooter. I don't quite buy it just yet. I want to see it over a longer period of time. But away from that, I mean, you got a lot of guys that love to live in the mid-range, to attack the basket, to clog the lane, essentially. And is Lonzo really a 3-point catch and shoot guy? He showed it last season. I mean, is that just an outlier though, or is that like the norm for him now? So there's just a lot of question marks around Chicago, and way too many for me to definitively say that I believe in this team, or even that I don't believe in this team. But I think that, just for me, again, I always start with like the defense when sort of trying to project a team over a full season as to where they might sit. And this is a team
the rookie
that was
the high end rookie. Who was their top pick this year? That's what I'm blanking on too. Was it Williams? Is the answer to everything Williams? Right? It was 2 years ago.
Patrick Williams was he was a high end rookie from the previous.
He was the 4th overall.
Yeah, he was a Florida State kid a couple years ago. I'm blanking on who they had this year at all.
They do have Alex Caruso.
They do have Alex Caruso off the bench. Yeah,
that's pretty amazing. No, I the Bulls are a mystery to me. I think if you made me take a position, I'm probably saying under for them at 42.5, even though I completely respect Levine is like he's like a legit star. There's really nothing wrong with his game at all. But the pieces around him are a little weird. Vucevic and DeRozan both kind of occupy the mid, that middle distance. Neither guy is going to get threes for you. They're all both going to try to get to the same sort of spots on the floor to get their offense, which is a little weird. I don't know anything about what Patrick Williams is ultimately going to give you offensively, maybe nothing. So it does really like their offense really revolves around Lonzo Ball making threes and Levine creating. And then the other guys just kind of alternating in that mid-range, and that's spooky. And the defense is a huge question as well. I don't get the warm fuzzy feelings that they've found the right ingredients to put together to be a competitive team.
Obviously a trick question that you guys just whiffed on. They did not have a 1st-round pick. Dan told me just now. I didn't. It's not like
you were thinking of Patrick Williams, who went 4th overall, that cashed some big bets for people who had him like 20.
I was going to say, I remember.
That's what you're remembering.
Like for sure. Like I know more about the NBA drafts because we bet so much on that than the actual NBA. It's way more fun running those through for the 6 weeks before the draft started. It feels like so. All right, close it out with some rapid fire. Basically on some teams that maybe you actually have an opinion on. Sounds like maybe I'm just ahead of the market on Chicago, and you guys are going to be feeling awful silly when I should actually just bet some small Chicago futures. And then if they're bad, I'll just forget all about them. If they're good, we'll bring up this moment here where I was way ahead of the market. I mean, we already touched on some of the top teams, but kind of an underrated, overrated. The Warriors, real quick, like just. Are they going to be back to a team that's competing? Drew,
Josh, go ahead. I don't know what to say.
Oh man, the Warriors.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah, they're a really hard one to kind of position. I mean, I'm not buying into I see a lot of people just assuming that Clay will be back in January and that's all they need, and they're going to be immediately back into the upper echelon of conversation, and I'm not buying it to that extent. Like I still think that even with Clay back and building off of last season, there's still a couple of notches below that. Let's not forget this was a play-in team last season, right? How much do you really expect them to to jump and grow in a season. And
Yeah.
a lot of last season as well, I don't think it was necessarily like that. Some of those results and some of those poor outings and those rough stretches, if you will, I don't think they were outliers. I think that's kind of like where this team is right now. And then Clay's not back till January now, Steve Kerr's saying. That's a fair chunk of games without him, and then you've got to sort of give him time to acclimatize and get back into the groove and feel with things a little bit. If I had to like stick a number next to him, I'm going to say they're probably a 6 seed. Maybe they just missed the play-in side of things and avoid the 7-8 seed, but I think 5 is the absolute ceiling for them for me.
Is Steve Kerr, are we sure he's good?
Are we going to do that every week?
Well, I wonder about Steve Kerr, really. They eventually figured a lot of important things out over the balance of last season. And Steph Curry, if he had played the way he played the last half of the season over the full season, he's probably your MVP. And I think he can be that same player this year, which means for me, they are underrated regular season team, overrated playoff team. I don't love this team's ability to navigate playoff series in a very competitive Western Conference at all the way that they're rostered. And I'm not expecting much from Clay, but I think they make their win total. I think they're probably competitive to win the Pacific. Like I got them at like plus 450-ish or something like that to win the Pacific. I think that should be closer to plus 350.
Do you think though that like seeding is important for them? Like I think health is obviously the priority, right? So that's kind of my question.
They're going to run Steph Curry into the ground either way, though. Like they're not going to load manage Curry, and Curry is kind of the secret sauce for that team winning regular season games, I think.
Of course.
So
Well, no, I was going to say like I took position on the Suns to win the division.
Ooh, interesting.
Because I think that they're going to be a great regular season team. I think they got better than what they were last season. And I don't think last season was an outlier for them. I think that's kind of what this team is now firmly established as. And just because I think regular season seeding for them matters so much more than it does for the Lakers or for the Warriors. Whereas for those guys, it's like with the experience that they have and the superstars they have, health is kind of the priority. For Phoenix, it's like we need that top 2 seed in the West to sort of give us.
I'm going to flip this around on you and say,
true, you can't rally the Valley if you're not in the Valley.
You can't rally the Valley if you're not in the Valley. That's true. I'm going to flip this around on you though and say that some of the veterans, some of the there may be a little overconfidence or in that locker room in terms of their ability to do it again. And I also think the Warriors need to sell tickets in that arena, and they need to win a lot of regular season games to do that. And I think I think there is going to be a heavy duty pump the tires on Steph Curry, get him some serious, some serious regular season accolades. Man, he'll be first team All NBA this year. He's probably in the MVP race, very very likely. And I get the sense that
rapid fire.
Okay, yeah. You went with the most interesting team first.
I picked a complicated team.
I did the most complicated one.
All right,
if you go Cavaliers, we're both gonna be like,
this will be actual rapid fire.
Okay.
The way the NBA lottery works now, the worst 3 teams get the same percentage chance to get that number 1 lottery ball. Who are those 3 teams? And is the obvious Lauri Markkanen-led Cavaliers in the conversation now that I know where he plays? I don't know if they are.
I think they might
Magic
actually avoid.
Number 1.
Yeah.
Magic number 1. Thunder are in there. Rockets are in there. That's probably your top 3.
I have Houston in there.
I'm going Houston Magic, and then Timberwolves, just because I want another.
Stop. We should talk Timberwolves. We should dive into this team because the market has been very hot on them, and it's been tough to explain. Somebody out there very confident that they're going to bounce back this season with Cat having a full regular off season. I don't see it personally, but there's somebody out there that believes heavily in that Timberwolves team. So I will be watching almost every one of their early season games to see if I'm seeing it, because right now I'm not.
Yeah. What about you, Josh? Relative to market, Timberwolves, overrated, underrated?
I think I'm kind of thinking they might be a little bit underrated.
I mean, they're rated pretty low, so I mean,
yeah, and that's why, right? Like I don't have them sort of quite at the level of the teams that they've been priced next to in terms of the win total. I have them a little bit higher than that. I haven't gotten involved in the betting of them because I think that they very well could be an absolute catastrophe, and like they're probably a cat injury away from being the worst team in the NBA.
That's
but
fair.
Anthony Edwards came a long way in the back half of last season.
He did.
And maybe there's like this assumption, just touching on what you were saying, Drew, in like the strong market support, maybe there's this assumption that he could take another step. And when you sort of couple that with a healthy cat, does D'Angelo Russell also just sort of accept his role a little bit more? And if you need less of him, he becomes better. That in itself might just be enough to get over what's a pretty shy total.
All right, two teams that met in the first, and I'm going to pair them together. Did they meet right away? I believe it. Atlanta and the Knicks. Ooh. Fun teams from last year. Obviously, I think they want to say where are the Knicks for? The Knicks are a lot further down. The Hawks are around 40-1 to win the title. Obviously, the Knicks are about double that. Not expected to maybe do what they did last year. Where do you have them as far as relative to the market?
I'll go first. Hawks, I think, are properly rated. I do think that they are a contender in the East, at least Final Four kind of deal. Knicks, I think, are overrated. And I think Thibodeau running those guys into the ground last season will ultimately have consequences this year.
Yeah, I'm with you on both. I think the Hawks are legitimately top four established in the East. I think I'd see a backward step from the Knicks. Good luck to Thibodeau as well, trying to run Kemba Walker into the ground. You're not going to get very far there.
All right, last one, and then I got to go.
Or you'll succeed very quickly.
Yeah, and when you're succeeding at running someone into the ground, it's not a good thing. All right, yeah, last one, I got to pick up some Chinese for the wife because it's Friday, baby. And it will be the Milwaukee Bucks because I'm actually interested in them. Second favorite in the East, I believe that's correct, right? Like they're about 4-1 to win the East. The next closest is Miami at 11 or 12. And then you have the Celtics 17-18, somewhere in there. So there's a decent, then right around there also the Hawks, a decent gap, but the Bucks are second fiddle right there. I mean, are they closer? Basically, the answer is, are they closer to the Nets than that or not?
I think that's fair. I think it's fair. They were the beneficiary, if you will, of injuries last season, as basically both teams were. So that made the finals, that is. And like, I just can't shrug what I saw in the early stages of that series between Milwaukee and Brooklyn. Like, I can't forget how Brooklyn basically had them throttled, really. And so for me, the pricing is fair. And I think they are a clear two. Like, I think it's a clear one, a clear two, and then a clear drop off in the East. So, yeah.
I think the Bucks are underrated in the futures market. I think that the sentiment of they only won because of injuries is the kind of sentiment that after a team wins their first title kind of fuels them to push hard coming out of the gate the next season, which means I think the Bucks probably have, a little bit of chip on their shoulder through the months of October, November, December, which gets them to, like, say, I don't know, 25-2, 24-3 kind of a start to the season, at which point their price to win the East, their price to win the title is nowhere close to 8-1. So if you're going to take the approach of filling out a portfolio, I think you bet Bucks now. I think you bet Nets then.
Yeah, 8.38 or 9.38 decimal odds. We'll talk decimal for Josh here. Wow. To win the whole shebang right now. That's not a bad price. And Ski brings up, if Giannis really has a jump shot, now it's over. I mean, that was just one set of clips, but if he's going to be smooth from all over the field, that's scary. He's like, oh, you might be the best player of all time all of a sudden. That's terrifying. All right, I do have to run here. Right. Shit on one coach quick. Drew, shit on a coach.
Jason Kidd, worst hire of the offseason. And the flip side, Rick Carlisle, just a brilliant hire by the Indiana Pacers. Pacers win more games than the Mavericks. That's my hot take for you.
Maybe I should have done say something nice about another coach. Yeah, Josh, you wanna coach and then
I won't double down on Jason Kidd, but that is just the worst hire. But I'll also shit on Doc Rivers because it's Doc Rivers, and he's just not going to get it done in the playoffs ever. So wherever he is, your team's screwed.
When they have a GIF of you making that face, and it's very popular, like that's for sure a bad sign.
Yeah, not good.
I love that one. So
It's a good.
All right,
it's
well,
a good gift. Yeah, good gift.
if you're listening and you can't see the screen because you did this in podcast form, Josh can be found at punt_school, like a punter, I guess, because they don't punt in basketball. You shouldn't kick
It's,
the ball in the stands.
I feel like I need to just let everyone know over in your side of the world. Like punt is basically wager over here
Yeah.
in Australia. Like just as a
Yeah,
Punters.
yeah. Josh is a classic basketball punter.
He's
He
just
also
a punter.
punts on. He also punts rugby. He punts netball, probably. Yeah,
A
all
little bit of
them.
netball here and there.
Yeah.
So at
Yeah.
punt_school, he does a bunch of NBA content. I'm sure you can find that all over his Twitter feed. He's one of the guys in the basketball chat we always talk about. So I'm listening to him all year because I need lots of NBA opinions in my ear holes. And obviously I listen to Drew too. You can find us right where you always find us. But yes, Josh, thanks a lot for your time. And fun bonus content. We're looking forward to the season. And
Best of
Drew,
luck this season.
I'm gonna hit the old music here.
Do it. Still getting used to this,
It still does take a little getting used to this old school music.
especially because it's like Indian summer here. It is hot.
It's like actual summer in Australia. Like they're in a whole different hemisphere. Or I suppose it would be spring.
Yeah, good point. It is.
It's been a while.
Just after the vernal equinox.